I'd owned my lake cabin for nearly 10 years. It was my sanctuary, nestled between tall pines overlooking water so still it mirrored the sky. No traffic, no city noise, no interruptions. At least, not until Karen's HOA decided they wanted control over everything in sight. Karen wasn't just any neighbor, she was the self-appointed queen of the Lakeview Association. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched like a crown, she patrolled the neighborhood with the same authority as a drill sergeant. She fined families for fire pits, threatened seniors over garden gnomes, and even tried to outlaw fishing on private docks. But the line she crossed with me, that was personal. See, Karen had been scheming to claim jurisdiction over properties the HOA technically didn't own, including my cabin, which sat just outside their mapped boundary. My deed was clean. My taxes were current. The HOA had zero authority over me. Still, she showed up week after week, demanding fees, threatening lawsuits, and slipping violation notices under my door like she owned the land. I ignored her until she tried to escalate. One Saturday morning, while I was inside the cabin preparing for a meeting with none other than the U.S. District Judge, a man reviewing multiple complaints against her HOA, Karen made her move. I heard the heavy slam of my screen door before I saw her. No knock, no announcement. She barged into my living room as if it were her office, clipboard clutched tight, mouth already running. "You can't host unauthorized meetings here," she snapped. "This property falls under HOA code, and I'm not going to allow illegal gatherings." I didn't rise from my chair. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I looked at the judge seated across from me, sipping coffee calmly, as if he'd been expecting this very moment. His eyebrows lifted, and the corner of his mouth tugged in the faintest smile. "Unauthorized," he said, setting his mug down. "Ma'am, do you have any idea who you're speaking to?" Karen blinked, clearly thrown off by his presence. "I don't care who you are. This man," she jabbed her finger at me, "is violating HOA law, and I have the right to enter and enforce it." That's when the judge leaned forward, voice low and deliberate. "Actually, the only law being violated here is yours." Karen froze, and for the first time since I'd met her, she didn't look like a queen. She looked cornered. Karen's lips parted, but no words came out at first. For someone who never hesitated to lecture a neighbor about lawn length or mailbox paint, she suddenly seemed unsure. Still, her pride kicked in fast. I don't know who you think you are," she stammered, planting her feet in the center of my cabin like she owned the place. "But I am the president of the Lakeview HOA, and that gives me full authority over all properties in this community, including this one." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Including this one," he repeated. His voice carried a weight that silenced the room. Karen didn't notice. She barreled ahead. "Yes, and if you think you can just ignore our bylaws, you're in for a rude awakening. This cabin, this dock, this land, everything here falls under HOA control. And if you don't comply, I'll issue citations, liens, whatever it takes." Her words hung in the air, bold and absolute, the kind of declaration that might have intimidated an ordinary neighbor. But I wasn't ordinary, and neither was the man sitting across from me. The judge calmly pulled a folder from his leather briefcase, sliding out a document with a seal so official it seemed to glow under the morning light. He laid it on the coffee table between us. "Mrs. Richardson, is it?" he said, his tone both sharp and formal. "Before you continue, you should probably know who I am. I am Judge Harris, U.S. District Court, and right now, I am in the process of reviewing multiple federal complaints filed against your HOA." Karen's confidence cracked, though she scrambled to hide it. "Complaints? What complaints? This association runs by the book." The judge leaned back in his chair. "By the book. According to the records in front of me, you've fined residents thousands of dollars for things not even covered under your charter. You've trespassed on private property. You've issued threats of foreclosure without legal standing. That is not by the book. That is abuse of authority." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the lake outside seemed to hold its breath. Karen shook her head vigorously. "That's ridiculous. These are just bitter neighbors who don't like rules. People like him," she pointed at me again, "think they're above everyone else. But I'm not afraid to enforce order." The judge steepled his fingers. "And yet here you are, entering a private residence without permission, interrupting a federal meeting, declaring control over property your own bylaws don't even cover. Do you realize what that looks like, Mrs. Richardson? Her face flushed crimson, but she stood her ground. I won't be intimidated. I've kept this neighborhood in line for 10 years, and I won't stop because some outsider says otherwise. Not even you. The judge's eyes narrowed. His calm demeanor hardened into something unmistakably stern. Then perhaps it's time you learn the difference between an HOA president and federal law. Karen's bravado faltered, her grip on her clipboard tightening as if it were a shield. But her silence spoke volumes. The tide had begun to turn, and she didn't even realize how badly she was cornering herself. Karen's silence didn't last long. Her pride wouldn't allow it. She squared her shoulders, gripping that clipboard like a sword, and forced a smug smile back onto her face. You think you can scare me with fancy titles and paperwork, she scoffed. I've dealt with county clerks, city inspectors, even lawyers who thought they could outsmart me. They all backed down, and so will you. Her voice carried the same arrogance I'd seen her use on retirees, young families, even veterans living in the neighborhood. But this time, her bluster was aimed at the wrong man. The judge didn't flinch. He didn't even raise his voice. Instead, he calmly slid another document across the table. Mrs. Richardson, this is a federal injunction. It was filed last week in response to your HOA's overreach into non-HOA properties, including this cabin. If you're going to insist you have jurisdiction here, I'd suggest you read the first page carefully. Karen snatched the paper, eyes darting across the legal jargon. I could see her confidence drain with each line. Still, she clung to her performance. This is nonsense, she sputtered. You can't just walk in here and pretend the HOA doesn't have power. We are a governing body. The residents elected me. That gives me full control. The judge's expression hardened. No, Mrs. Richardson. It makes you a volunteer president of a neighborhood association with limited scope. You have no authority to trespass, seize property, or impose unlawful fines, and certainly no right to interrupt a federal meeting. Her face reddened, but she refused to retreat. Instead, she jabbed a finger at me again. He's behind this, isn't he? Filing complaints, stirring up trouble, calling in favors. This whole circus is because he thinks he's above the rules. That was my breaking point. I stood up, finally, meeting her eye at full height. No, Karen, this is because you've bullied, threatened, and extorted people for years. You walked into the wrong cabin at the wrong time, and now you're going to answer for it. For the first time, I saw genuine uncertainty flicker in her eyes. But then, just as quickly, she lashed out again. Answer for it? Please. I'll have my attorney down here by sundown. I'll sue this entire association if I have to. I'll file for trespassing on you. She swung her glare at the judge. And even federal titles won't protect you from a civil suit. The judge leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his voice measured and sharp as a blade. Mrs. Richardson, I suggest you tread carefully, because the next words you speak may very well be repeated in a courtroom, not as a plaintiff, but as a defendant. Karen blinked. Her smirk faltered. You've already stacked violations high enough to trigger federal oversight: trespassing, harassment, misuse of HOA funds, intimidation tactics. Shall I continue? Because every complaint filed, every testimony gathered, and every unlawful action you've taken is in this binder. He tapped the folder. And trust me, it's more than enough to put your little empire under a microscope. The color drained from her cheeks. Her bravado, once an unstoppable force, now looked fragile. For the first time, she seemed to realize this wasn't just another neighborly spat she could bulldoze her way through. The silence stretched. The only sound was the creak of the wooden beams overhead and the distant splash of water against the dock. Karen finally muttered, "You don't scare me." But her voice cracked, and that crack told me everything. The queen of the HOA had finally met a power she couldn't intimidate. Karen's words, "You don't scare me," hung in the air like a challenge, but her shaky tone betrayed her. The judge leaned back slowly, his calm authority filling the room in a way that no shouting match ever could. "Mrs. Richardson," he said, measured and firm, "this isn't about fear. It's about accountability. And accountability is something you've managed to dodge for far too long." Karen's jaw tightened. She lifted her chin, desperate to recover her lost ground. I've done nothing wrong. I've kept this community clean, safe, and orderly. Every resident knows without me this place would fall apart. You think they'll thank you when you strip me of my authority? The judge gave a humorless chuckle. On the contrary, I've read over 50 sworn statements from your residents. They describe harassment, intimidation, financial extortion, and repeated trespassing, all at your hands. If this is what you call leadership, then yes, they'll thank me. That landed like a hammer. Karen's face went pale, and for a moment she seemed to waver, but her pride was relentless. You think a stack of papers can undo 10 years of service? You think I'll just walk away because some judge and some bitter neighbor say so? Her eyes flicked to me, burning with resentment. I built this HOA. I decide what happens here. The judge straightened, his presence towering even from his chair. His voice dropped lower but sharper than ever. No, you don't decide. The law does, and the law is no longer on your side. Karen's breathing quickened. Her hand gripped the edge of her clipboard so hard her knuckles whitened. Then, in a move so desperate it bordered on absurd, she slammed the clipboard down on my coffee table and pulled out her phone. That's it, she hissed. I'm calling the sheriff. Let's see how far your little performance goes when real law enforcement shows up. The judge exchanged a knowing glance with me. We didn't stop her. We let her dial, let her spit out half-truths into the receiver, let her demand backup against trespassers in my cabin. Minutes later, red and blue lights flickered across the window. Karen smirked triumphantly as 2 uniformed deputies stepped onto the porch and into the cabin. There, she shouted, pointing at us like a queen summoning her knights. Arrest them! He's trespassing! She jabbed a finger at me. And he's impersonating a judge. The deputies looked at each other. Then one of them looked directly at the judge and immediately straightened to attention. Judge Harris, he said firmly, nodding with respect. We weren't told you were here, sir. Karen's face fell. Her triumphant smirk evaporated. What? You know him? The deputy nodded. Everyone in the county knows Judge Harris. Karen staggered back, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find oxygen. The deputies stepped forward. Not toward us, but toward her. Ma'am, one of them said, his tone professional but stern, we've received multiple calls about your behavior lately. And based on what we're seeing right now, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning. Karen's jaw dropped. Questioning? You can't be serious. I'm the president of this HOA. The deputy calmly took her arm. And that title doesn't put you above the law. Her. Protests filled the cabin as they escorted her outside, her shrill voice echoing across the lake. For once, it wasn't the sound of authority. It was the sound of defeat. The judge gathered his papers, slipping them neatly back into his case. He gave me a look equal parts relief and satisfaction. Well, he said dryly, I'd say that concludes our meeting. I couldn't help but smile. Karen had stormed into my cabin thinking she owned the place. She walked out in handcuffs, finally learning that no HOA president, no matter how loud, could outmuscle the law. And that was the day Karen's reign of terror finally came crashing down. She didn't leave the lake cabin as the powerful HOA president she pretended to be. She left as a woman exposed out of power and forced to face the consequences of her own arrogance. For years, she bullied neighbors, twisted rules, and weaponized her title. But in the end, all it took was the right moment, the right law, and the right people standing up to her. And let me tell you, watching her dragged out of my cabin in handcuffs wasn't just justice for me. It was justice for every single family she had ever tried to intimidate. But here's the thing. Karen is just one of many. Across the country, HOAs are filled with people just like her, people who think their clipboard makes them kings and queens of the block. That's why I share these stories, to remind you that no matter how loud they shout, no matter how entitled they act, there's always a way to fight back. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more HOA Karens get exactly what they deserve, make sure you smash that like button. It helps more people find these stories. Hit subscribe to HOA Karen Stories and turn on the bell, because trust me, there are plenty more unbelievable encounters coming your way. And tell me in the comments, what would you have said to Karen as she was being escorted out by the deputies? I'll be reading through them, and the best ones might get featured. In the next video, Because with HOAs, the drama never ends, and then neither do the stories.